the polling information of the RAVCO was very misleading. It didn't ask the kind of questions that you want answered in terms of whether or not the public feels about a public-private partnership. But we had a poll done with Ipsos Reid across Canada, and the figures are very clear. 75% of the Canadian population is opposed to private-public partnerships in public infrastructure, hospitals, and the such. And so it's very clear that those polls that were done by RAVCO did not ask the right questions. And the public in this city, in this region, is opposed to private-public partnerships.
I think that when you look at the public, and I have said this many times, I actually think the public's ahead of all politicians, including myself. The public supports that we go ahead with a rapid transit. They're even willing to pay for it. And they have constantly, at least in my opinion, said, get on with it. And I'm one, too, that on polls, if you do the question right, you can get the answers on both sides. But I have been out in enough. I've been out at the public meetings. I've been out talking to the public enough over the last 10 years to know that the public itself, or the majority of the public, fully supports this line. And so it's a real disappointment, I think. And I think the board's going to realize that when they do talk to the average person using our system.
The Bus Riders Union has spoken to thousands of bus riders over the past months and years about the RAV line. But what I want to impress on you at this time is how profoundly unpopular this entire project is. And I'm not talking about the polling numbers, because I know it's easy to call people and say, well, would you like to have a SkyTrain from downtown to Richmond, and who's going to be opposed to that? I mean, I certainly would like to. It would be very convenient. But for people to understand and make an informed decision, they actually have to know about what the trade-offs that are being made here. And when people start to understand those, I certainly don't think that there's not wide popular support, and certainly among bus riders and transit users in this region, there's very little support for this project.
I oppose the interference in local decision-making by the provincial government in its insistence on a P3 approach. Don't allow their ideological commitment to privatization to bully you. I believe that the TransLink board should only endorse the RAV project if it is totally publicly funded and can be justified looking at the needs of the transit system as a whole. It should definitely not go ahead with P3 involvement. We taxpayers and transit users will deal with the consequences of your decision for decades to come.
Based on the precedent that happened with the water agreement, which was already dealt with a couple of years ago, this is an awful sense of déjà vu that once again the local government is potentially putting itself at the mercy of global trade agreements. And secondly, there is the issue of principle and autonomy from the decisions of the provincial government.
Many of us out in the valley have been doing quite a lot of research on the so-called P3 model, because there is a proposal to use that model to build and operate a hospital in Abbotsford, and we are totally opposed to that also. Our research has convinced us that P3s are not appropriate for public services, and we believe that public transit should remain public. One of the reasons that has already been mentioned is that it costs more for private companies to borrow money. In an Australian report of their P3 projects, the writer quoted, "The least credit-worthy government could borrow money more cheaply than Australia's most credit-worthy corporate borrower," and I believe the situation is the same here.
I'm here today on behalf of the Vancouver Port Authority and the Vancouver Gateway Council, and we're here to support the RAV line proceeding.
I'm not against RAV. I'm not against transportation improvements in the region.
As a port, we rely critically on an efficient road and rail transportation system, and we believe that anything that gets people out of cars and using transit will help us move our goods and services around the region. So for that reason, we support it.
I'm concerned about the fact that dollars have been promised for very specific types of transit, not allowing any ability to look at other options to do the same thing. I'm concerned about the province dictating what local government does. It's that sort of sandbox mentality that if you don't do it, I say I'm going to take my pill and I'm going to go home. So maybe that really means that they really don't think that local government should be independent.
We know that government bodies are the best risk as far as borrowing this money goes. We know that. We know it's cheaper. So why do we choose to go the more expensive route?
I am the founder of the Citizens Association of Forensic Economists at Hawke's Cafe, and Ron Gamble, the leader of the Reform Party of British Columbia, has asked me to investigate and try and recover some of the conversion of public assets to private benefit in respect of major projects in British Columbia. And I'm thinking specifically of BC Hydro, BC Rail, the RAV line, and BC Online, the land registry system. And I think what we're suffering from here is a very bad attack of what might be described as economic laryngitis, because the three drivers to this are three Larrys: Larry Berg, Larry Bell, and Larry Blaine. And I'll address each of them in turn.
Dodge that one.
The forensic economist, which chases waste and fraud in public spending. I'd like to read you from page 5 of the Capital Procurement Policy Guidelines put forward by the Treasury Board of British Columbia in respect of P3s. In exchange for sharing project risks, the private partner expects to be compensated through any combination of construction contracts, user fees, government subsidies, service payments, or concessionary rights. In order to participate in financing of the venture, the private partner would also expect a fair return on its investment. Generally, P3s are most likely to be effective when there is a potential for government to assume or manage certain risks to facilitate private sector participation, e.g. rezoning of property. And I think I understand it really in terms of the motivations of the three Larrys. We have Larry Berg, who is the chairman or president of the Vancouver International Airport, which is technically described as a community-owned corporation, not-for-profit, holding letters patent from the federal government. And in all my 40 years of business around the world, I've never seen an animal quite like that. Other than it is described what it doesn't do, I haven't got a clue what it does do, and it certainly offers the citizen no hope of transparency or the ability to track public assets. So they have lots of money collected from $15 user fees going through the airport. So we know they're not short of a bob or two. If I talk about Larry Blaine, he was the former chairman of the Premier's Public-Private Partnership Committee and Debt Management Committee. And in the aftermath of my introducing to the public what I call the Nutcracker solution for public-private partnerships, which is application of Section 336 and 337 of the Criminal Code, Section 336 relating to a public servant failing to produce information demanded of him by someone who is authorized to demand it. And of course we cannot get information about public-private partnerships. That's 14 years in jail. And I think in terms of the GVRD water agreement, I went to see Larry Blaine shortly after that, and I wanted an explanation as to why we couldn't get information about the GVRD water agreement, and was there a conflict of interest in having the public sector pension funds participating in that development. And he told me, quote, "I don't want to go there." Let's address now the Larry Bell issue. Larry Bell is a very interesting man. He's actually presently bringing a court action against the provincial government of British Columbia, Glenn Clark and Stephen Hollett, who is a member of Partnerships BC, presumably because he disputes the benefits. Okay, the benefits of a P3 in virtue of BC Online.